Hi, everybody, and welcome back here for another video audio podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Just a few days to go before Christmas, so trying to get content out to you. And I was delighted to see, I don't know if you saw this over in the States, but Tulsi Gabbard, who I think is pretty good, she is exposing the deep state warmongers. And I wanted to share with you what it was that she said. She said, deep state warmongers and their propaganda media, that's the mainstream media, are again trying to undermine President Trump's efforts to bring peace to Ukraine and indeed Europe by falsely claiming that the US intelligence community agrees to and supports EU-NATO viewpoint that Russia's aim is to invade and conquer Europe in order to gin up support for their pro-war policies. Tulsi's right. She then adds, well, I think this is pretty clear, the truth is that US intelligence assesses that Russia does not even have the capability to conquer and occupy Ukraine, never mind speaking of invading and occupying Europe. Now, Tulsi is absolutely right in this, in what she's saying. The fact of the matter is, after 3 years, what has Russia achieved? It's taken 20% of the Ukrainian territory, which is formerly Russian, really. The Russian-speaking people live there anyway, in the Donbass. 3 years. And what? All of a sudden, it's going to just zoom across, and before you know where you are, it's they're marching up the Champs-Elysees, they're up the Mall in London. It's unbelievable nonsense, this. But this is the propaganda being spewed out, and you can see it across the EU-NATO. I also think it's interesting that Tulsi combines the EU-NATO as kind of a propaganda machine for war. Like, that's what she's saying. And it is a propaganda machine for war. But the EU, we all get that. We understand that. But NATO as well. That's why I think the US should leave NATO. Let NATO collapse, because NATO continues to warmonger, to seek the continued killings in Ukraine, just carry on ad infinitum. I mean, NATO, do remember, by the way, Ukraine isn't in NATO. Sometimes you'd lose track of that, such as the enthusiasm for NATO to try and support Ukraine. It's very strange. But it's good to see that the Trump administration is calling out this EU-NATO warmongering, because I find it so ironic, not just in terms of what Tulsi says, that, Russia doesn't have the real capability to do it, which they don't, but also at the time, this season of peace and goodwill towards men, Christmas, right? All that NATO and the EU want to talk about is war. I mean, for quite a while, if you've been following me, you'll know that I keep referring to NATO as the axis of evil. And I think it is. I think whatever NATO started out as, and perhaps that was a good idea, after 1990 and the fall of the Soviet Union, really that should have seen NATO being wounded up. But instead, NATO's expanded. And that's why it's a global predator. Like, there's just no doubt about it. If NATO was doing a good job anywhere, I'd like to know about it. But I haven't seen anything in the last several decades that makes me think that NATO is anything other than a bad force, a force not for good. Now, that's why President Trump would do well to extract the US from NATO, what he has done. But I think this is a shallow victory, really. He's getting the Europeans to pay more for NATO. Now, that's fair enough, and I salute that. But NATO's still there, and you can see from Mark Rutte and the rest of the gang in NATO that, they're hot for war. Like, they just want to see more killing. They want to send your sons and daughters to their deaths if they can. So how can the US be part of such an organization, especially when it also funds it massively? So so that's what the situation is anyway. We have a warmongering, bloodthirsty NATO EU trying to imply that the United States intelligence community shares its assessment of, a Putin just waiting to send his tanks across the border. And Tulsi saying, no, we don't share that at all. Stop trying to put words in our mouth. So that is the nature of NATO in 2025. It's becoming more and more dangerous, a rogue animal. And when it then has this, when it unites with the European Union, that's when you've got the real problem. That's when you have this coming together of two very malignant forces. It's probably the global deep state, to be fair, if you wanted to sum it up. That's perhaps what it is. But it's what it wants to achieve. And all it wants is war. Thanks for listening.